Hana pressed her back against the ancient tree and tried to catch her breath. The bark felt rough against her scaled skin. Around her, the sacred grove was burning. Smoke filled the air and made her eyes water. She could hear the heavy footsteps of Krek's soldiers getting closer. Her plasma spear felt warm in her hands. Too warm. The weapon had been in her family for 300 years. Her grandfather carried it. Her father carried it. Now it was hers. But the old weapon was failing. She could see cracks running along its silver surface. Each time she fired it, the cracks grew bigger. "Hana!" Her brother Minho called from behind a fallen log. He was only 16 years old, too young to be in a battle like this. But the Kreks did not care about age. "They killed everyone they found. Stay down," she whispered back. "Keep the others quiet." Behind Minho, 23 civilians huddled together. Old people, children, wounded warriors. They were all that remained of her village. Everyone else was dead or captured. The thought made her stomach hurt. Jiwan, the village elder, crawled over to her. His long white beard was dirty with ash.
"How many Kreks are out there?"
he asked. Hana looked through the trees. She could see their red armor moving between the trunks. "Too many," she said. "Maybe 50. Maybe more. And we have," Hana counted in her head, 12 warriors left, including me. She did not mention that 3 of those warriors were badly hurt, or that they were almost out of power for their weapons. Jiwan nodded slowly. "Then we make our last stand here, in the sacred grove. Our ancestors will watch over us." Hana wanted to believe that, but her ancestors had never faced enemies like the Kreks. The aliens were big and strong. Their skin was like metal. Their weapons could punch through trees. They had ships in the sky and endless soldiers on the ground. A plasma bolt flew past her head and burned a hole in the tree behind her. The Kreks were testing their range. Soon they would attack for real. "Listen to me," Hana said to her remaining warriors. "We cannot win this fight, but we can make them pay for every step. We can give the civilians time to pray. We can die with honor." The warriors nodded. They knew what was coming. They had all seen what happened to other villages. The Kreks took no prisoners. They wanted the Velaran people gone so they could take their moon. Hana's spear made a soft cracking sound. Another line appeared along its length. The weapon her family had trusted for generations was dying, just like everything else she loved. She thought about her father. He died defending the capital city 2 months ago. She thought about her mother. The Kreks bombs had taken her 3 weeks later. Now it was just her and Minho. Soon it might be just Minho, if he was lucky. "They are moving," said Quan, one of her warriors. He pointed through the smoke. Dark shapes were running between the trees. "Getting closer. Remember," Hana said, "make every shot count. When your weapon fails, use your blade. When your blade breaks, use your hands. We are Velaran. We do not surrender." The first Krek soldier stepped into the clearing. He was huge, nearly 7 feet tall. His red armor gleamed in the firelight. His weapon was bigger than Hana's whole body. Behind him came more soldiers, 10, 20, 30. They moved in perfect lines like some terrible machine. "Now," Hana shouted. Plasma bolts flew from the Velaran positions. 3 Krek soldiers fell, but more kept coming. They spread out and found cover behind rocks and trees. Their return fire was like thunder. Hana rolled to a new position and fired again. Her spear's energy blast hit a Kreks in the chest. The alien stumbled but did not fall. His armor was too strong. She fired again. This time the Kreks went down, but her spear was getting hotter. The cracks were spreading faster. She had maybe 10 shots left before it died completely. To her left, she heard Minho scream. A plasma bolt had hit the log he was hiding behind. The wood was on fire. "The civilians were trapped! Cover them!" Hana yelled. She ran toward her brother, firing as she moved. 2 Krek soldiers turned their weapons toward her. She dove behind a rock just as their shots burned the air where she had been standing. The battle raged for 20 minutes. It felt like 20 hours. One by one, her warriors fell. First Quan, then Dongho, then brave young Hyun. Each death made the Kreks advance a little closer. Hana found herself alone behind a boulder with only Sora, the last surviving warrior besides herself. Sora was bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Her weapon was dead. All she had left was a combat knife. "Can you see them?" Sora asked. Hana looked around the rock. The Kreks were everywhere now. They had surrounded the civilians completely. Their commander, a massive alien with golden trim on his armor, was walking forward. He was not even trying to hide. He knew the battle was over. Hana raised her spear one more time. As she pulled the trigger, the weapon finally gave up. The ancient plasma conduits burst apart with a shower of sparks. The spear that had protected her family for 3 centuries was dead. She looked at the broken pieces in her hands. Then she looked at Minho and the other civilians. They were all staring at her with hope in their eyes. They still believed she could save them somehow. The Krex commander stopped 20 feet away. He raised his weapon and pointed it at her chest. His voice was like grinding metal when he spoke in broken Velaran. "You fight well, but you lose. Surrender and die quick." Hana stood up slowly. She still held the broken pieces of her spear. "I am Hana of the Silver Clan. I do not surrender." The commander made a sound that might have been laughter. Then die slow. He was about to pull the trigger when the sky caught fire. Something was falling through the atmosphere above them. It was burning bright white like a falling star, but it was too big to be a star, and it was falling too fast. The Krex soldiers looked up in confusion. Even their commander lowered his weapon to stare at the sky. The burning object hit the ground 50 yards away with a sound like the world breaking. The impact threw dirt and rocks everywhere. Trees fell over. Both Velaran and Krex soldiers were knocked to the ground by the shockwave. When the dust cleared, there was a crater in the middle of the sacred grove. Smoke was rising from whatever had fallen from the sky. Hana wiped dirt from her eyes and stared at the crater. Something was moving inside it. Something was climbing out. The figure that emerged from the smoking hole looked like nothing she had ever seen before. It walked on 2 legs like a Velaran, but it had no scales. Its skin was pale and soft-looking. It wore strange green clothing and carried weapons she did not recognize. The creature looked around at the battlefield. It saw the Krex soldiers. It saw the Velaran civilians. Its eyes met Hana's across the clearing. Then it smiled, and Hana realized that everything was about to change. The strange creature stepped out of the crater and looked around the battlefield. Hana could see him better now. He was shorter than a Velaran with no natural armor or claws. His skin looked soft and easy to damage, but something about the way he moved made her think of a hunting cat. Careful. Dangerous. The Krex commander was the first to react. He shouted orders in his harsh language. 20 soldiers turned their weapons toward the newcomer. The creature seemed small and weak compared to them. But then he moved. Hana had never seen anything so fast. The strange being dove to one side just as the Krex opened fire. Plasma bolts burned through the air where he had been standing. Before the aliens could fire again, he had rolled behind a fallen tree and disappeared from view. "What is that thing?" Sora whispered. "I do not know," Hana said, "but it moves like a warrior." The Krex spread out to surround the tree where the creature was hiding. They moved slowly and carefully. These were experienced soldiers. They had fought many battles on many worlds. They knew how to hunt dangerous prey, but they had never hunted anything like this. A small metal sphere rolled out from behind the tree. It looked harmless. The Krex soldiers stared at it in confusion. Then it exploded. The blast was not big, but it was perfectly placed. 3 Krex soldiers were thrown to the ground. Their armor was cracked and smoking. Before they could get up, the strange creature appeared from nowhere. He had somehow moved around behind them without anyone seeing. In his hands was a weapon that looked almost primitive compared to Krex technology. But when he fired it, Krex soldiers fell. The weapon made a rapid stuttering sound. Small metal projectiles flew out faster than the eye could follow. They punched through Krex armor like it was made of paper. The aliens had never faced anything like it. Hana watched in amazement as the creature fought. He did not stand still like a normal warrior. He was always moving, always changing position. When the Krex tried to surround him, he was somewhere else. When they fired at where he was already gone. But it was not just his speed that impressed her. It was the way he thought. While the Krex used brute force, the creature used cleverness. He turned their own tactics against them. When they tried to corner him, he led them into their own crossfire. When they charged him, he disappeared and attacked from behind. One Krex soldier got close enough to swing his massive weapon at the creature's head. The alien was twice as big and 4 times as strong. Any normal being would have been crushed, but the creature ducked under the swing and did something that made Hana gasp. He grabbed the Krex soldier's arm and twisted. The sound of breaking bone carried across the clearing. The huge alien went down screaming. "Impossible," Sora breathed. "How can something so small be so strong?" But Hana was starting to understand. The creature was not just strong. He was smart about how he used his strength. He knew exactly where to hit, exactly how to move. Every action had a purpose. The battle was turning. Half the Krek soldiers were down. The others were backing away, confused and frightened. They had never faced an enemy like this. Their commander was shouting orders, but his troops were not listening. They were too busy trying to stay alive. The creature seemed to notice Hana and the civilians for the first time. He looked at them across the clearing and said something in a language she had never heard. His voice was deeper than a Velaran's, but not as harsh as a Krek's. He pointed at her and then at the ground near his feet. The meaning was clear. He wanted her to come to him. Hana hesitated. This being had just killed 20 Krek soldiers in 5 minutes. What would he do to her? But then she saw the way he looked at the civilians. There was no threat in his eyes. No hunger for violence. He looked at them the same way she did, like someone who wanted to protect them. She made her decision. Stay here, she told Sora. Watch the others. Hana ran across the clearing, keeping low to avoid any remaining Krek's fire. The creature covered her movement, sending precise bursts from his weapon at any alien who tried to target her. When she reached him, he was changing something in his weapon. His movements were quick and sure. He had done this many times before. Up close, she could see details she had missed. His clothing was some kind of uniform. There were patches and symbols she did not recognize. His equipment was worn but well maintained. This was a professional soldier. He looked at her and spoke again in his strange language. When she did not respond, he tried something else. He pointed at himself and said a single word that sounded like Taiho, his name. He was telling her his name. Hana pointed at herself. Hana, she said. Taiho nodded and almost smiled. Then he pointed at the remaining Krek soldiers. They were regrouping near the edge of the clearing. Their commander was trying to rally them for another attack. Taiho held up his weapon and shook his head. Then he pointed at her broken spear and made a questioning gesture. He was asking if she had any other weapons. Hana drew her combat knife. It was a good blade, but against Krek's armor it would not do much. Taiho looked at it and nodded anyway. Then he reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out another small metal sphere. He showed her a small button on its surface. Then he mimed throwing it and diving for cover. Another explosive. He wanted her to help him attack the Kreks. But before they could move, something terrible happened. A child's scream cut through the air. Hana spun around and saw that one of the Krek soldiers had circled behind the civilians. He had grabbed Minho by the arm and was dragging him away from the others. No! Hana started to run toward her brother, but Taiho was faster. He sprinted across the open ground between him and the Krek soldier. The alien saw him coming and raised his weapon. He was going to kill Minho and then kill Taiho. What happened next made Hana believe in miracles. Taiho threw his explosive device with perfect accuracy. It landed right at the Krek soldier's feet. The alien looked down in confusion just as it exploded. The blast knocked the Kreks away from Minho. Before the alien could recover, Taiho was on him. The human fought like a demon, using moves Hana had never seen. In seconds, the Krek soldier was dead. Taiho scooped up Minho and carried him back to the other civilians. The boy was scared but unhurt. Taiho set him down gently and said something soft in his strange language. Then he ruffled Minho's hair the same way their father used to do. Hana felt something break open in her chest. This alien creature had risked his life to save her brother. He had shown more kindness in one moment than the Kreks had shown in months of war. She looked at Taiho with new eyes. He was not just a warrior. He was someone who protected the innocent. Someone who understood what was worth fighting for. The remaining Kreks were retreating now. Their commander was screaming at them to stand and fight, but they had lost their will. Too many of their friends were dead. This strange new enemy was too dangerous, but Hana knew they would be back. The Kreks never gave up. They would bring more soldiers, more weapons. Maybe ships from orbit. Taiho seemed to understand this too. He was looking at the sky and speaking into a small device attached to his wrist. He sounded frustrated. Whatever he was trying to do, it was not working. He turned to Hana and pointed at the forest around them. Then he made a walking motion with his fingers. He wanted to move. To find a better place to defend, Hana nodded. The sacred grove was beautiful, but it was not a fortress. If they were going to survive what was coming, they needed better ground. She gathered the civilians and the wounded. Sora helped the ones who could not walk on their own. Elder G1 leaned on his walking stick and tried to look brave for the children. As they prepared to leave, Hana looked back at the crater where Taiho had fallen from the sky. She still did not understand what he was or where he came from. But she knew one thing for certain. He was going to change everything. They moved through the forest for 3 hours before Taiho called a halt. Hana was impressed by how quietly the strange warrior could travel. Even carrying supplies from his crash site, he made less noise than most Velerans. He seemed to know exactly where to step to avoid breaking branches or disturbing loose rocks. The group had grown during their journey. Word of the battle in the sacred grove was spreading. Small groups of survivors found them along the mountain trails. First came Inwu and his family of 6. Then Gyuri arrived with 12 fighters from the river settlements. By evening, they had 42 people following Taiho and Hana toward the old fortress. Iron Spire Mountain rose before them like a stone giant. The ancient Valaran fortress built into its side had been empty for 50 years. Most people said it was too old to defend, but Taiho had studied it through some kind of seeing device and nodded with approval. He seemed to think it would work. "Why does he want to go up there?" asked Gyuri. She was a good fighter, but she did not trust the alien. "The Krek ships can bomb us from orbit. We will be trapped." Hana had been wondering the same thing, but every time she started to doubt Taiho's plan, she remembered how he had saved Minho. This being understood something about war that they did not. "He has not been wrong yet," she said. As they climbed the narrow path, Taiho fell back to walk beside her. He had been trying to learn Velaran words during the journey. His pronunciation was terrible, but he was getting better. "Hana," he said carefully. "Teach. Fighting?" She looked at him in confusion. He was asking her to teach him how to fight? That made no sense. She had seen what he could do in battle. Taiho seemed to understand her confusion. He pointed at himself and made shooting motions with his weapon. Then he pointed at her and mimed throwing a spear. Finally, he brought his hands together. He wanted to learn from each other, to combine their ways of fighting. That evening, they made camp in the lower chambers of Iron Spire Fortress. The old stone walls were still solid, and the rooms provided shelter from the wind. Taiho spent an hour walking around the fortress, examining every wall and passage. He made marks on a piece of cloth that Hana realized was some kind of map. While the others prepared food and tended to the wounded, Taiho approached Hana with a strange request. He wanted to spar with her. "No kill," he said in his broken Valaran. "Learn only." Hana was curious despite herself. She had never fought a human before. She did not even know what humans were capable of. Taiho looked so much smaller and weaker than a Krex. How had he defeated so many of them? They moved to a clear area away from the others. Taiho removed his heavy equipment and weapons. Without them, he looked even more fragile. But Hana had learned not to trust appearances. "Begin slow," Taiho said. "Show me Valaran way." Hana drew her combat knife and moved into a traditional fighting stance. Valarans were taught to fight with grace and precision. Every movement had to be perfect. Every strike had to have meaning. She attacked slowly, as Taiho had requested. A thrust toward his chest, a slash at his arm, a sweep at his legs. Taiho watched carefully and then tried to copy her movements. He was clumsy at first, but he learned quickly. "Your turn," Hana said. "Show me human way." What Taiho showed her changed everything she thought she knew about fighting. Humans, she learned, did not fight with grace. They fought with purpose. Every movement was about ending the battle as quickly as possible. Where Velerans danced around their enemies, humans crashed into them. Where Velerans sought perfect technique, humans sought perfect results. "Veleran fighting beautiful," Taiho said after they had practiced for an hour. But Kreks not care about beautiful. Kreks only understand hurt. He was right, and Hana knew it. Her people's traditional fighting style was designed for duels between honorable warriors. It was not meant for facing an enemy that fought without honor, that used overwhelming numbers and superior technology. "Teach me," she said. Over the next 2 days, while they prepared the fortress for siege, Taiho taught Hana and her fighters a new way of war. He showed them how to use the environment as a weapon, how to make traps from simple materials, how to attack an enemy's mind as well as his body. "Kreks think they know you," Taiho explained as they worked on the fortress defenses. "They think all Velerans fight same way. When you fight different, they confused. Confused enemy make mistakes." In return, Hana taught Taiho about Veleran techniques. She showed him how to move silently through different types of terrain, how to read the signs that showed where enemies had passed, How to use meditation to stay calm in battle. Humans fight with anger, she observed. Valarans fight with peace. Maybe we fight with both, Teho suggested. Angry at evil, peaceful in heart. Their lessons were interrupted on the third day by scouts reporting a massive Krex force approaching the mountain. Yuri counted over 200 soldiers plus flying vehicles and heavy weapons. They also brought something new. Large metal containers that the scouts could not identify. That evening, Taiho's communication device finally worked. He spoke rapidly in his own language for several minutes. When he finished, his face was grim. My people come, he told Hana, but many days away. We must hold until then. How many days? Asked Elder Jiwon. Taiho held up both hands twice. 20 days. Even Gyuri, who never showed fear, went pale. We cannot hold for 20 days against that army. They will break these walls in 20 hours. But Taiho was smiling in a way that made Hana nervous. It was the same smile he had worn when he climbed, out of his crater in the sacred grove. Not if they cannot find walls to break, he said. He led them to the highest tower of the fortress and pointed down at the approaching Krex forces. They were setting up camp in the valley below, preparing for a siege. Their commander clearly planned to surround the fortress and starve them out. Krex think like Krex, Taiho said. They see fortress, they think siege. But what if no fortress? Hana stared at him. You want to abandon Ironspire? But this is the strongest position for hundreds of miles. Strongest for defense, yes, but terrible for attack. Taiho pointed at the mountain paths winding down toward the Krex camp. Krex expect us to wait for them to come up. What if we go down to them? The idea was insane. Attack a force 5 times larger with better equipment and air support? It violated every rule of Velaron warfare. But as Taiho explained his plan, Hana began to understand. The Krex were confident in their overwhelming strength. They would not expect a desperate attack from a cornered enemy. And humans, she was learning, specialized in doing the unexpected. You want to teach them that they do not know us, she said slowly. Now you understand, Taiho replied. War is not about being strongest. War is about being smartest. That night, as they prepared for what might be their last battle, Hana found herself thinking about the warrior's way. For generations, her people had believed that honor and tradition were the most important things in battle. But Taiho was showing her something different. The most important thing was not how you fought. It was who you saved by fighting. She looked at Minho sleeping peacefully near the fire, at Elder Jiwon telling stories to frightened children, at all the survivors who had trusted her and Taiho to keep them safe. Tomorrow they would find out if a human way of thinking could save Valaran lives. As she fell asleep, Hana heard Taiho speaking quietly into his communication device again. His voice sounded worried. Whatever his people had told him, it was not good news. But when morning came, he was ready to fight. And so was she. The Krex were about to learn that their enemies had changed. The attack began before dawn, just as Taiho had planned, but it was not the attack the Krex were expecting. While the aliens slept in their camp below, thinking themselves safe, 20 Valaran fighters crept down the mountain paths in complete silence. Hana led one group. Gyuri led another. Taiho moved alone like a ghost in the darkness. They did not attack the soldiers. Instead, they attacked the supplies. Taiho had taught them that an army was like a living creature. Cut off its food and it would starve. Cut off its weapons and it would weaken. The Krex had brought enough supplies for a long siege. But they had not expected anyone to be crazy enough to target their supply depot. Hana planted the explosive devices Taiho had given her on the ammunition storage containers. Gyuri's team sabotaged the water purification systems. Taiho himself did something to the Krex communication equipment that made it spark and smoke. By the time the first explosions lit up the valley, they were already climbing back up the mountain paths. The Krex commander was furious. His name was Vex, and he had conquered 17 worlds for the Empire. He had never faced resistance like this. Enemies were supposed to cower behind their walls and wait to be defeated. They were not supposed to sneak into his camp and destroy his equipment. Find them, he roared at his soldiers. I want every Valaran dead by sunset. But finding them was harder than Vex expected. The aliens tried to storm the fortress, but the defenders were not where they expected them to be. Taiho had taught the Valarans to fight from hidden positions, to strike and then disappear before the enemy could respond. When Krex soldiers charged up the main path, they found it blocked by fallen rocks. When they tried the eastern approach, carefully placed explosives brought down an avalanche. Every route to the fortress had become a trap. 3 days passed this way. The Kreks grew more frustrated with each failed attack. They were losing soldiers and equipment while their enemies seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. On the 4th day, Vex decided to try a different approach. Instead of attacking the fortress, he would attack something the Valarans cared about more than their own lives. His scouts had found another group of refugees hiding in caves 5 miles away. Old people, children, wounded civilians who could not fight. Vex decided to capture them and use them as bait. Taiho's communication device brought the news just after sunset. Somehow his people had ways of watching from the sky. They told him about the Kreks force moving toward the refugee caves. "We have to save them," Hana said immediately. "Is trap," Taiho replied. "Vex wants us to leave fortress. Attack us in open ground. I do not care if it is a trap. Those people are counting on us to protect them." Taiho looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Then we spring trap first." What happened that night became a legend among the Valaran people. Later, they would call it the Night of Falling Stars because so many explosions lit up the darkness. Taiho divided their forces into 3 groups. Hana would lead the rescue mission to the caves. Gyuri would create a diversion by attacking the main Kreks camp. Taiho would do what he did best, something unexpected. Hana's group reached the caves just as the Kreks were preparing to attack the refugees. There were 30 alien soldiers, too many to fight directly. But Taiho had taught her that numbers were not everything. She positioned her fighters in the rocks above the cave entrance. When the Kreks moved in to capture the refugees, Velaran warriors struck from above like hunting birds. The aliens never saw them coming. Meanwhile, Gyuri's diversion was working perfectly. She led her fighters in a series of hit-and-run attacks on the Kreks camp. Every time the aliens thought they had her surrounded, she was somewhere else, striking at a different target. But it was Taiho who created the real surprise. While the Kreks were focused on fighting the Valarans, the human was doing something impossible. He was stealing their flying vehicles. Kreks airships were guarded, of course, but the guards were watching the sky for enemies, not the ground. They never expected someone to climb up from below and get inside their aircraft. Taiho had studied the captured Kreks equipment for days. He understood enough of their technology to fly their own ships against them. When the first stolen airship opened fire on the Kreks camp, Vex could not believe what he was seeing. "How is that possible?" he screamed at his communications officer. "How does a primitive alien know how to fly our ships?" The answer was simple, though Vex would never understand it. Humans were very good at learning how things worked, and once they learned, they were very good at turning those things into weapons. The battle raged all night. By dawn, the Kreks had lost half their aircraft and most of their heavy equipment. Worse, word was spreading through the mountains that the aliens could be beaten. Other Valaran groups were starting to fight back instead of just hiding. Vex made his final mistake when he decided to capture Elder Jiwan. The old Valaran had been helping coordinate the rescue efforts. His wisdom and calm leadership gave hope to people who had lost everything. Vex thought that if he could capture such an important figure, the resistance would collapse. He was wrong. When Hana learned that the Kreks had taken Jiwan during a supply raid, she wanted to rescue him immediately. But Taiho convinced her to wait and plan. They had one chance to get the Elder back. If they failed, he would be dead. Vex keeps prisoners in command ship, Taiho explained, studying the images his people sent from the sky.
Ship has shields, guards, weapons.
"Very hard to attack. Then how do we get inside?" Hana asked. Taiho smiled that dangerous smile again. "We do not attack ship. We make ship come to us." The plan was insane, even by human standards. They would pretend to surrender. Vex would bring his command ship down to accept their surrender in person. While he was gloating over his victory, they would strike. "What if he does not believe our surrender?" Gyuri asked. "He will believe," Taiho said, "because he wants to believe. Kreks think they understand how war works. They think enemy always surrenders when beaten. But we are not beaten," Hana pointed out. "No, but we make them think we are." The hardest part was making the surrender look real. They had to abandon some of their positions. They had to let the Kreks see their people looking defeated and hopeless. It went against every instinct Hana had as a warrior, but it worked. Vex's command ship landed in the valley below Ironspire Fortress. The Kreks commander stepped out with a full honor guard. ready to accept the surrender of the Valaran rebels. He brought Elder Juan with him, bound and guarded as proof of his victory. That was when Hana and Taiho struck. They had hidden weapons and explosives all around the landing area. When Vex's ship touched down, they turned the valley into a trap. The Kreks found themselves surrounded by enemies they thought had surrendered. The battle was fierce but short. Vex's guards were good soldiers, but they were caught completely off guard. While Hana and her fighters attacked from the ground, Taiho used the confusion to get inside the command ship. What he found there changed everything. The ship's computers contained more than just battle plans. They held the complete Krek strategy for conquering this sector of space. Dozens of worlds marked for invasion. Billions of lives that would be lost if the Krek succeeded. But more importantly, the computers showed that massive Kreks reinforcements were coming. Hundreds of ships carrying tens of thousands of soldiers. They would arrive in less than 10 days. When Taiho emerged from the ship with Elder Jiwan, his face was grim. He had sent an urgent message to his people, but he did not know if they could arrive in time. "We have won this battle," he told Hana, "but war is not over. Much bigger fight is coming." Hana looked at the captured Kreks equipment, at her tired but victorious warriors, at the rescued civilians who looked to her for hope. They had come so far. They had learned so much. But it might not be enough. "Will your people reach us in time?" she asked. Taiho looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. "I do not know. But if they do not, we fight anyway. That is what humans do. That is what Valarans do now too." As night fell over Ironspire Mountain, both species prepared for what might be their final battle. But they would not face it as strangers anymore. They would face it as allies. The Kreks reinforcements arrived exactly when Taiho's captured data said they would. Hana stood on the highest tower of Ironspire Fortress and watched the sky fill with enemy ships. Hundreds of them blotting out the stars like a metal storm cloud. "How many soldiers?" asked Elder Jiwan. The old Valaran had recovered from his capture, but his eyes still held the memory of Krek's prison cells. Taiho lowered his viewing device. His face was pale. Maybe 50,000, maybe more. Even Giri, who never backed down from any fight, whistled softly. "We have 400 people, most of them civilians. Then we make each person count for 100 Kreks," Hana said. But her voice sounded hollow even to herself. Over the past week, word of their victories had spread across the moon. Thousands of Valaran refugees had made their way to Ironspire Mountain. The fortress was packed with people who believed Hana and Taiho could protect them. The weight of their trust felt heavier than armor. The first Krek ships began landing at dawn. They did not rush like before. These aliens had learned to respect their enemies. They set up careful positions around the mountain, with overlapping fields of fire and strong defensive points. Their new commander was different too. Where Vex had been angry and impatient, this one was cold and methodical. He surrounded the fortress completely and began a systematic bombardment. Not enough to destroy the mountain, but enough to wear down the defenders' nerves. "He is trying to break our spirit before he breaks our walls," Taiho observed. For 3 days, the bombardment continued. The ancient stone walls of Ironspire held, but cracks were beginning to show. Worse, people were beginning to despair. Children cried constantly. Adults stared at the ceiling every time another blast shook the fortress. On the 4th day, Taiho made a desperate decision. "I must try to contact my people directly," he told Hana. "My communication device is not strong enough to reach them from here, but the Krek ships have powerful transmitters." Hana stared at him. "You want to sneak into a Krek ship? Alone? His only way. If my people know exactly where we are, they can find us faster." It was a suicide mission, and they both knew it. But Taiho had that look in his eyes again. The look that said he was going to do something impossible and somehow make it work. "I am coming with you," Hana said. "Too dangerous. You are needed here. My people need hope more than they need me. If we can bring your warriors to this fight, that is worth any risk." They left the fortress that night through a hidden passage Taiho had discovered in the lower levels. The tunnel emerged in a cave halfway down the mountain behind Krek's lines. Moving through the enemy camp was like walking through a nightmare. Thousands of Krek soldiers filled the valley. Their ships blocked out the sky. Patrol lights swept back and forth, searching for any sign of movement. But Taiho moved through it all like he belonged there. He had studied Krek's patterns for weeks. He knew where the guards would be, when they would change shifts, which paths were safe to use. They reached the command ship just before midnight. It was a massive vessel, bigger than any building Hana had ever seen. Getting inside seemed impossible, but Taiho had learned something from the captured ship data. Krek's vessels had emergency maintenance ports for repairs during battle. They were small, heavily armored, and supposed to be impossible to open from outside. Supposed to be. 20 minutes later, Hana found herself crawling through ventilation ducts inside an alien warship. The sounds of the vessel surrounded them, humming engines, clicking computers, the harsh voices of Krek's crew members. The communications center was in the heart of the ship. When they finally reached it, Hana counted 12 Krek's technicians working at various stations. Too many to fight silently, but Taiho had brought some of his special explosive devices. "When I trigger these, we will have maybe 5 minutes before entire ship comes looking for us," he whispered. "Must work fast." The explosions were small but perfectly placed. Emergency lights started flashing. Alarms began wailing. In the confusion, Taiho reached the main communication console and connected his own device to it. He spoke rapidly in his own language, sending a stream of data about their location and situation. Then he sent something else. All the captured Krek's battle plans and troop positions. "Done," he said. "Now we run." They almost made it out. Krek's soldiers found them just as they reached the maintenance port they had entered through. Plasma bolts filled the narrow corridor. Hana's armor was hit twice, but the ancient Valaran metal held. They fought their way out of the ship and into the camp beyond. But now the entire Krek's force was alert and searching for them. Searchlights swept the mountainside. Flying vehicles buzzed overhead like angry insects. "This way," Taiho called, leading her toward a rocky outcrop that would provide cover. They were 50 yards from safety when the shot hit him. Hana saw Taiho stumble and fall. Dark blood spread across his uniform. A Krek sniper in one of the ships had finally found his target. "Go," Taiho gasped as she knelt beside him.
Get back to Fortress.
"My people come soon. I am not leaving you. People need you. Minho needs you." But Hana had learned something from her human friend. Sometimes the smart tactical decision was not the right decision. She slung Taiho over her shoulder and started climbing. He was heavier than he looked, and Krek's soldiers were closing in from all sides. But she had also learned human stubbornness. She would not leave a friend behind. They reached the fortress just as the bombardment began again. But this time it was different. The Kreks were not trying to wear them down anymore. They were preparing for a final assault. Hana got Taiho to the medical station and helped treat his wound. The shot had missed his vital organs, but he had lost a lot of blood. He needed rest and time to heal, time they did not have. The assault began at dawn on the 8th day. Thousands of Krek soldiers swarmed up the mountain paths like ants. Their flying vehicles darkened the sky. The bombardment was so intense that the fortress walls finally began to crack. "This is it," Guri said grimly. "They are coming with everything." Hana looked around at her people. 400 Valarans against 50,000 Kreks. Impossible odds. But they had faced impossible odds before. "We hold the walls as long as we can," she announced. "When the walls fall, we fight in the corridors. When the corridors are taken, we fight room by room. We do not surrender. We do not retreat. We make them pay for every step." The first wave of Krek soldiers reached the outer walls an hour later. The battle was brutal and desperate. Valaran warriors fought with everything they had, using every trick Taiho had taught them. But there were just too many enemies. By midday, the outer walls had fallen. By afternoon, the Kreks were inside the fortress itself. Hana found herself fighting back-to-back with Sora in a corridor filled with smoke and screaming. "I am sorry," she told her friend during a brief pause in the fighting. "I promised to keep everyone safe. You kept us free," Sora replied. "That is enough." That was when the sky caught fire again. But this time it was not a single burning object falling from space. It was hundreds of them. Thousands. The entire sky was full of falling stars, burning bright white as they tore through the atmosphere. The Krek soldiers stopped fighting and stared upward in confusion. Even their officers seemed stunned by what they were seeing. Hana knew what it was before the first drop pods hit the ground. Humans. They fell like rain across the mountainside. Some landed behind Krek's lines. Others came down right in the middle of enemy formations. Each pod carried a single human warrior, armed and ready to fight. But these were not ordinary soldiers like Taiho. These were members of an elite unit, the Storm Crows. Hana could see the difference immediately in how they moved, how they fought, how they turned the battlefield into chaos. Within minutes, the Krex assault had collapsed into confusion. The aliens found themselves fighting enemies on all sides. Human warriors attacked with the same impossible speed and cleverness that Taiho had shown, but multiplied by hundreds. In the middle of the human landing zone, a larger pod came down. When it opened, a tall human woman stepped out. She wore different armor than the others with symbols that marked her as a leader. She looked around the battlefield, spotted the fortress, and began giving orders. 20 minutes later, she was standing in Hana's command room. "I am Colonel Park," she said in perfect Valaran. "Where is Sergeant Kim?" Hana led her to the medical station where Taiho was resting. When he saw his commander, he tried to stand at attention despite his wounds. "Reporting for duty, Colonel," he said in his own language. Colonel Park looked at him sternly. Then she smiled and ruffled his hair the same way he had done to Minho. "Good work, Sergeant. Your intelligence about Craig's plan saved a lot of lives." She turned to Hana. "My people tell me you have been taking care of our lost soldier." "He took care of us first," Hana replied. The battle for Valara lasted 3 more days, but the outcome was never in doubt once the humans arrived. Craig's forces that had seemed unstoppable were systematically destroyed by coordinated human and Velaran attacks. The Krex Empire, faced with humanity's military doctrine and the fierce resistance of their new Velaran allies, decided this sector was too expensive to conquer. They withdrew their remaining forces and sued for peace. 6 months later, Hana stood on the observation deck of a human starship, watching Valara turn slowly below them. The moon looked peaceful now. Cities,